You think you've heard it all? We've found people who called the police on someone for smiling too much and filed reports on how a person breathes. These aren't your typical bad reviews. This is a journey into the most hilariously unhinged complaints ever lodged against total strangers. Get ready to feel incredibly sane by comparison as we count down 55 real stories that prove some people desperately need a hobby. 1. Imagine being so utterly miserable that someone else's joy feels like a personal attack. A woman actually called the police on a local jogger because he was smiling and waving cheerfully at everyone he passed. She claimed it was a calculated psychological tactic designed to make her feel bad about her life and that his relentless optimism was threatening the peace. Apparently, being a morning person is now a suspicious activity requiring a badge and a siren to investigate. Should being too happy in public be a crime? Or is this lady just the final, undefeated boss of all Karens? 2. A woman complained to a bank manager about the man who had been in front of her at the ATM. His transgression? After completing his transaction, he spent 5 full seconds carefully folding his receipt into perfect quarters and placing it neatly into his wallet before walking away. She called this an unnecessary post-transaction ritual that showed a complete lack of urgency and was profoundly disrespectful to the valuable time of everyone waiting in line. 3. A patron at a public pool complained to the lifeguard about a teenager who did a cannonball. The complaint came from a woman sitting in a lounge chair 30 feet away. She claimed the ballistic water strike was so powerful that a single microscopic drop of water landed on the page of her book, inflicting irreparable moisture damage to the paper. She demanded cannonballs be banned as a form of hydrodynamic assault. 4. At a fast food restaurant, a customer complained to the manager about the person who had just ordered. Their issue, the person asked for a signature burger but with no pickles, no onions, and extra ketchup. The complainant argued that these modifications constituted a betrayal of the chef's original vision for that specific menu item. He insisted that making such drastic changes was an act of culinary anarchy that disrespected the integrity of the number 3 combo. 5. A man at a dog park was told to leave because his purebred Samoyed was too fluffy and looked too expensive. A woman marched up and claimed her rescue mutt was getting a depressed look in its eyes because it couldn't compete with the Samoyed's majestic coat. She literally accused the man of flaunting his wealth through his pet's grooming routine and creating an atmosphere of canine elitism. It's a dog park, lady, not a high school prom where everyone is checking each other's labels. 6. A patron at a public library in Ohio filed a formal written complaint against the librarian for breathing in a distractingly rhythmic way. They claimed the consistent sound of air entering and exiting her lungs created a repetitive beat that made it impossible for them to concentrate on their true crime novel. Imagine being so sensitive that you demand someone stop the basic process of staying alive just so you can read in peace. The library director reportedly had to explain that breathing is a non-negotiable requirement for all staff members. 7. A guy in Wisconsin called 911 to report a man at a gas station for wearing thick wool socks with flip-flops in the middle of July. He told the operator that no sane person would make that fashion choice, and he feared the man was having a psychotic break or was a fugitive trying to blend in poorly. The operator had to gently explain that while it is a fashion tragedy, wearing socks with sandals is unfortunately not yet a felony. At what point does a fashion faux pas become a public safety concern in your mind? 8. At a popular beach, a man complained to the lifeguard about a family building a sandcastle nearby. His problem was with the castle's quality, which he deemed architecturally unsound and aesthetically displeasing. He claimed its poorly constructed ramparts and asymmetrical towers were an eyesore that lowered the visual standard of the entire shoreline. He was genuinely offended by someone else's amateur sand sculpting skills. How bad would a sandcastle have to be for you to report it? 9. A young man was stopped by an older, self-appointed neighborhood watch captain who complained that he was walking with way too much purpose. She claimed his brisk, confident pace was intimidating the local squirrels and making the elderly residents feel rushed. even though he was on the other side of the street. She suggested he slow down and meander aimlessly to better fit the sleepy neighborhood vibe. It's hard to imagine having enough free time to police the walking speed of a total stranger. 10. At a playground, a mother overheard another woman calling for her son, Oliver. She confronted her, claiming that since her Oliver was 5 and the other was only 3, she had senior rights to the name within that specific park's jurisdiction. She actually demanded the other mother use a nickname like Ollie or Junior to avoid confusing the local atmosphere and committing a form of identity theft against her son. The level of entitlement required to think you own a top 10 baby name is truly astronomical. 11. A driver called the non-emergency police line to report the car in front of him at a red light. His complaint? The driver was bobbing their head too aggressively to their music. He claimed the vigorous head bobbing was dangerously distracting and made him think the person wasn't paying attention to the road. He insisted it could even cause a whiplash injury, making them an unpredictable hazard. The dispatcher had to patiently inform him that enjoying music, even with an unacceptable amount of enthusiasm, is not actually a crime. 12. In a busy grocery store, a woman complained to the manager about a man who was taking too long to pick out avocados. She claimed he was conducting a forensic examination of every single one, which she called produce hoarding. She argued he was violating an unspoken social contract by trying to find the perfect one, thus leaving only the bruised, subpar options for everyone else. She seriously wanted the manager to tell him to pick one and move on with his life. 13. At a local gym, a member complained to the front desk about another man lifting weights. The issue wasn't grunting or dropping weights, but the man's facial expression. The complainant said his deeply pained and overly intense workout face was graphically disturbing and frankly unappealing, and that it was ruining the gym's positive, motivational atmosphere. He seriously asked if a staff member could please go over and tell the total stranger to look a little more relaxed and approachable while deadlifting 300 pounds. 14. A woman in a corporate office building filed a formal complaint with building security against a stranger she saw in the lobby. The stranger's offense? The sound of her high heels. The complaint described the clicking sound on the marble floor as unnecessarily sharp and aggressively rhythmic, which she classified as a form of auditory harassment. She claimed it pierced her concentration and demanded that building security enforce a decibel limit for all footwear to protect her peace of mind during the brief walk from the door to the elevator. 15. At a park, a man complained to a ranger about a dog owner playing fetch with his retriever. The problem was that the owner was throwing the ball unrealistically far. The complainant argued that this was making the dog sprint recklessly, putting social pressure on other, less athletic dogs, and making their owners feel inadequate. He called it the creation of an elitist canine sporting environment in a public space. 16. A moviegoer summoned an usher to complain about a stranger sitting several rows ahead. The stranger's crime was having popcorn with extra butter. The complaint wasn't about the sound of eating, but the overpowering olfactory assault of the extra butter smell, which they claimed was aggressively contaminating their personal airspace and completely ruining the serious atmosphere of the historical drama they were trying to watch. They requested to be moved to a different, less buttery section of the theater. 17. A shopper at a mall complained to security about a stranger's t-shirt. The shirt had a simple cartoon drawing of a very sad-looking cat with a single tear. The woman claimed the image was emotionally manipulative, and that the cat's sorrowful expression was projecting negativity and casting a depressive pall over the entire food court. She insisted it was making it psychologically impossible for her to enjoy her cinnamon sugar pretzel and wanted security to ask the person to cover up the offending feline. 18. A complaint was filed with the city's transit authority against an unknown passenger on a commuter train. This person's violation was breathing on the cold window and then using their finger to draw a smiley face in the condensation. The complainant, who witnessed this from across the aisle, called it an unhygienic display of juvenile vandalism that significantly lowered the dignity of the morning commute for all the serious professional passengers. What's the most trivial thing a stranger has done that genuinely annoyed you? 19. A customer at a cafe complained to the barista about the man in front of him in line. The man's offense was ordering a large iced coffee on a freezing, blustery winter day. The complainant stated that this seasonally inappropriate beverage choice was a deliberate flaunting of thermal norms that he found personally unsettling and almost arrogant. He felt it was a reckless act that was single-handedly ruining the cafe's cozy, warm beverage vibe for everyone else. 20. In a busy coffee shop, a customer complained to the barista about a person typing on a brand new top-of-the-line laptop. The typing was silent, but the complainant was upset by the device itself. They claimed that using such a flagrantly expensive piece of technology, with its glowing logo and sleek aluminum chassis, was financial exhibitionism that was disrupting the humble, artistic, starving writer vibe that everyone else in the cafe was trying so hard to cultivate. 21. A customer complained to a coffee shop manager about the person in front of him who paid for a $3 coffee with a $100 bill. The complaint wasn't about the inconvenience, but that it was an economically destabilizing act. He argued that taking so much change drained the barista's entire cash drawer and created a financial liability for the store for the rest of the morning shift, which he found deeply irresponsible. 22. A traveler at an airport complained to a customer service agent about people on the moving walkway. His issue wasn't with those standing still, it was with the people walking. He argued that the walkway was designed for passive conveyance only, and that the walkers were abusing the system by using it as a speed boost. He claimed this created a stressful, competitive environment for those, like himself, who simply wanted to stand still and glide peacefully to their gate as intended. 23. At an art museum, a visitor complained to a docent about a fellow patron who was standing in front of a famous painting. The person wasn't blocking the view, but they had been looking at the artwork for over 10 minutes. The complaint stated that this intense, prolonged staring was sucking all the artistic energy out of the room, making it impossible for anyone else to form their own independent and pure interpretation of the masterpiece, free from his silent influence. 24. A man called the police non-emergency line to report what he termed J-waiting. He was infuriated by a person at a completely deserted intersection who was patiently waiting for the walk signal, even though there were no cars in sight for miles. He called this excessive, blind obedience to the rules and claimed the person's complete lack of initiative was disrupting the natural, efficient flow of pedestrian traffic. Has a stranger's by-the-book behavior ever driven you crazy? 25. A concert-goer flagged down an usher to complain about a man in the same row who was clapping during the encore. The problem wasn't the volume, but the terrible timing. He claimed the man was clapping enthusiastically but hopelessly offbeat, and that this rhythmic sabotage was actively ruining the final song for everyone in their section. He called it a profound sign of disrespect to the highly skilled musicians on stage. 26. A customer in a bookstore complained to an employee after witnessing someone place a book back on the wrong shelf. They didn't just point out the error, they insisted the employee needed to have a serious talk with that individual about the foundational importance of the Dewey Decimal System and basic literary etiquette. They treated it not as a simple mistake, but as a deliberate act of willful bibliographic chaos that threatened the very order of the store. 27. A diner complained to a restaurant manager about another patron they encountered in the restroom. The issue? The person was washing their hands too performatively. They claimed the vigorous scrubbing, the elaborate soap application, and the theatrically extended rinsing time was a holier-than-thou display of hygiene, clearly designed to make everyone else in the restroom feel like a germ-ridden peasant by stark comparison. 28. In a crowded parking lot, A driver complained to mall security that the person parked next to them had backed into their spot, while they had pulled in head first. They claimed this oppositional parking was a passive-aggressive act of deliberate nonconformity. They insisted that having the cars face different directions disrupted the lot's natural feng shui and made them deeply uncomfortable just looking at it. Is there a right way and a wrong way to pull into a parking spot? 29. A complaint was filed with City Park Services about a person playing fetch with their dog. The problem was that the dog was impossibly well behaved. The complainant argued that the dog's flawless obedience, sitting, staying, and returning the ball perfectly to hand every single time, was unnatural and made their own chaotic, beloved mutt look bad. They claimed it was causing severe performance anxiety for both them and their pet. 30. Air travel is already a waking nightmare, but one passenger took it to a whole new level of petty. They summoned a flight attendant mid-flight to complain that the guy in 12 Bravo was eating sourdough bread too aggressively. Not loudly, but with pure aggression. The complainant insisted the way he tore the crust was an intimidating display of toxic dominance that made them feel unsafe. They actually asked if his bread could be confiscated for the remainder of the flight. It just proves some people leave home actively looking for a reason to be offended by a simple sandwich. 31. At a public library, a patron complained to the librarian about the sound of another person writing with a ballpoint pen. The issue wasn't clicking the pen, but the physical act of writing itself. The complainant claimed the soft, scratching sound of the ink being applied to paper was acoustically abrasive and filled the room with anxious energy, making it impossible for them to concentrate on their magazine. They asked if the writer could be supplied with a felt-tip pen for a quieter experience. 32. A man at a food court complained to a security guard about another diner's choice of eating utensils. The individual was meticulously cutting their slice of pepperoni pizza with a knife and fork. The complainant wasn't claiming it was snobby. He was genuinely offended by what he called a profound violation of pizza's fundamental nature. He insisted it was un-American, and that seeing it happen was ruining his own properly handled slice. 33. A passenger on a bus complained to the driver about a young man who gave his seat to an elderly woman. The problem was that he did it too quickly and too demonstratively. The complainant claimed this performative kindness was clearly designed to make everyone else who didn't stand up feel like a bad person. He called it moral grandstanding and said it was creating a toxic atmosphere of competitive virtue. 34. A person in a city park called the Parks Department to report a man who was feeding pigeons. The complaint wasn't that he was attracting birds, but that he was not distributing the breadcrumbs equitably. The caller insisted that some of the more assertive pigeons were getting all the food, and the man's poor distribution was causing social unrest and infighting among the flock. They genuinely wanted a park ranger to intervene and enforce fairer feeding practices. 35. At a large hardware store, a customer complained to the manager about another shopper who was studying a paint swatch for too long. The person had been looking at a single shade of off-white for about 5 minutes. The complainant argued that by doing so, they were monopolizing the emotional spectrum of beige and preventing other customers from being able to properly consider their own neutral color options without being influenced. Do you think you can claim a color just by looking at it for a while? 36. A customer at a grocery store berated a teenage cashier because of the person who had been in front of them in line. The issue was the order they placed items on the conveyor belt. "They put the bread before the canned goods," the person fumed, claiming this total lack of structural foresight was an affront to physics and common sense. They insisted the cashier should have intervened and reordered the items to prevent the inevitable crushing. 37. At a highway rest stop, a man complained to a janitor about another person in the restroom. The individual had used the high-powered air dryer to dry their hands for a full 30-second cycle. The complaint wasn't about the noise, but that the person was selfishly wasting taxpayer-funded electricity and contributing to the climate crisis, one hand at a time. He suggested a timer be installed to prevent such wanton energy expenditure. 38. A homeowner called their local council to complain about a jogger who ran past their house every morning. The issue was the jogger's attire. The person wore an ensemble of extremely bright, high-visibility neon green and pink gear. The caller claimed the blinding fluorescence, even in broad daylight, was a public nuisance and a form of light pollution that was giving them a headache as they tried to drink their morning coffee. 39. In a high-rise office building, a tenant filed a formal complaint with management about another person's elevator etiquette. The issue wasn't talking on the phone, but the way a man pressed the buttons. The complaint alleged he used unnecessary force and a violent jabbing motion, which displayed a clear lack of mechanical sympathy. It claimed this was likely causing cumulative microtrauma to the elevator's delicate electrical system and requested a building-wide memo on proper, gentle button-pushing technique. 40. A family enjoying a picnic with a full charcuterie board was reported to a park ranger. A woman complained their setup was too professional and was creating an unfair standard of living that made her own bag of chips and lukewarm soda look pathetic. She wanted the ranger to tell them to put their fancy cheese away because it was hurting the community's self-esteem and general morale. Is there a specific level of mediocrity we all have to maintain just to keep the peace in public spaces? 41. A woman called her city's non-emergency line to report a person who had stopped in the middle of a busy sidewalk to tie their shoe. The complaint wasn't that they were blocking the way, but that they were doing it with excessive theatricality. She claimed the dramatic bend, the focused look of concentration, and the final, triumphant double knot was a deliberate performance of a minor inconvenience designed to solicit unwarranted sympathy from passers-by. 42. A shopper in a Target parking lot, the natural habitat for suburban chaos, called the police because another person parked an identical silver SUV 3 spots away. The caller was utterly convinced this was an elaborate stalking attempt or a glitch in the matrix that the authorities needed to investigate immediately. They refused to leave the store until an officer arrived to confirm that yes, the most popular car model in America sometimes appears in the same zip code twice. The officer's report dryly noted the complainant was still suspicious, even after this reassurance. 43. While going through airport security, a man complained to a TSA agent about the person in front of him. The problem wasn't that they were slow, it was that they were too fast and organized. He claimed the person's hyper-efficient pre-sorted bins and smug one-pass removal of their laptop was a form of intimidation that set an impossibly high standard for the rest of the line. He felt their competence was creating performance anxiety for less prepared travelers. Is it possible to be too good at airport security? 44. An HOA in Florida received a frantic email from a resident complaining that their neighbor was stealing their sunlight. The neighbor was simply standing on his own deck reading a book. The complainant argued his physical shadow was falling onto their petunias, depriving them of vital nutrients. They demanded a formal schedule for when the neighbor was allowed to be outside so it wouldn't interfere with their garden's peak solar intake hours. If you were that neighbor, would you start wearing a giant umbrella hat just to be petty? 45. A visitor at a public park flagged down a park ranger to complain about a tourist who had just thrown a coin into the main fountain. The tourist's crime was tossing in a penny. The complainant argued that such a low-value wish was clogging up the fountain's wish-granting mechanism with cheap sentiment. He believed that pennies lacked the economic sincerity required for a wish to be taken seriously and was insulting to the fountain's magic. 46. After pressing the button at a crosswalk, a man watched as another person arrived and pressed the exact same button again. He immediately walked over to a nearby police officer to complain. He claimed the second push was a vote of no confidence in his initial press, and he took it as a personal insult. He told the officer it was an unnecessary act of civic redundancy and an attack on his competence as a responsible pedestrian. 47. A driver filed a formal complaint with the management of a parking garage about the sound of another car's alarm. The complaint wasn't about a false alarm, but about the short, two-note chirp the car made when the owner locked it. The complaint stated that the cheerful sound was inappropriately upbeat for the grim, concrete environment of a parking garage and suggested a mandate for more somber, minor key locking sounds to better match the architectural mood. 48. In an office break room, an employee complained to human resources after witnessing a colleague stand and watch their lunch heat up through the microwave door. The complaint stated that this intense, unblinking surveillance of the food was a form of micromanagement that was interfering with the natural radioactive cooking process. They claimed it created a high-pressure environment for the appliance and made them too uncomfortable to use it afterward. 49. A passenger on a city bus complained to the driver about another rider who had pulled the stop requested cord. Their issue was that the person pulled it a full 3 blocks before their actual stop. The complainant argued that this premature signaling created a lingering sense of false hope and temporal dissonance for everyone else on the bus, who now had to ride for several minutes knowing the request had already been made. 50. At a classic American diner, a customer complained to their waitress about the man sitting alone in a booth. His offense? He was studying the menu with far too much intellectual rigor. The complainant claimed the man's furrowed brow and intense analytical gaze was overthinking the simple joy of a bacon cheeseburger, turning a straightforward meal choice into a high-stakes philosophical dilemma. They insisted his indecisiveness was sucking the culinary spontaneity out of the entire establishment, making them second-guess their own perfectly good order. 51. A shopper at a mall complained to a security guard about another person's posture on the escalator. The individual was holding the rubber handrail with just 2 fingers in what the complainant described as a display of casual disdain for the machine's complexity. They argued that this escalator arrogance showed a complete lack of respect for the engineering involved and set a dangerously cavalier example for the children present. They suggested a sign be installed demonstrating the proper, full-handed grip. 52. A passenger on a subway complained to a transit officer about a person sitting across from them who was listening to music on headphones. The problem wasn't sound leakage, it was the person's silent foot tapping. The complainant claimed the visible, inaudible rhythm was neurologically disorienting and was creating a silent disco effect that gave them a headache because their brain kept trying to guess the song. They described it as a form of auditory teasing. 53. At a communal mailbox in an apartment complex, a resident complained to the building manager about the way a fellow tenant retrieved their mail. They claimed the person opened their small metal mailbox door agonizingly slowly, allowing for a dramatic, suspenseful creak. The complainant insisted this was a deliberate power move designed to monopolize the mail retrieval experience and imply that their mail was far more important than anyone else's. 54. An employee complained to their office manager after seeing someone buy the last bag of Cool Ranch Doritos from the break room vending machine. The complaint wasn't just that they were now out of stock. It was that the buyer had violated an unwritten social contract by taking the very last one. They called it an act of profound selfishness that destroys hope for all who follow, and demanded a sign be put on the machine reminding people of this sacred rule. Have you ever felt personally victimized by a vending machine choice? 55. On a city sidewalk, a man began loudly complaining about a woman who opened her umbrella at the very first drop of rain. He wasn't in her way and she didn't hit him with it. He was furious at her meteorological pessimism. He claimed her premature surrender to the elements showed a weak character and was ruining the dramatic tension of the impending downpour for everyone else who was willing to wait and experience the weather properly. We live in a world where the way you park your car can be a declaration of war, where smiling is a suspicious activity, and where breathing rhythmically is a public disturbance. These stories are a hilarious and maybe slightly terrifying reminder that for some people, The line between a minor annoyance and a federal crime is basically invisible. But now we have to ask you the most important question. What is the single most ridiculous, petty complaint you've ever secretly wanted to make about a complete stranger? Confess in the comments below. This is a safe space for the absurd. If you enjoyed this deep dive into glorious pettiness, destroy that like button and subscribe for more proof that common sense isn't so common.